So we seem to be in Groundhog Day, a personal favorite film of mine, but certainly not perhaps a situation that Donald Trump is liking. Indeed, earlier today, the foreign minister of Iran saying that the US is facing an even bigger miscalculation. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure what to title or where to start because of the calamities around this. But someone who maybe knows what's actually going on in the latest developments over the US-Iran war is Alan Eyre. Alan, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Well,
and what is going on?
I couldn't have said it better than you did. Groundhog Day. We're back in the two clocks issue, where the U.S. is hoping that its blockade of Iran will cause the Iranian leadership to cry uncle and move its red lines, which is highly unlikely. And the Iranians are hoping that continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz forces the U.S. to cry uncle heading towards the midterms. What's changed in the last week or so is the consolidation of the strategic position of the Iranian leadership that it doesn't want to give President Trump a break by reopening any traffic through the strait as he heads into the midterms. And they just want to turn the pain up to 11 so that it can cause more strategic rethink to President Trump. They're very concerned that if they were to allow any sort of temporary respite by reopening traffic through the strait, it would give Trump a breather. He would do better in the midterms, and then the U.S. would just turn around and attack again after the midterms. So the Iranian position is hardened. Now they're also trying to get a lot of their benefits up front, all the goodies that they were supposed to get as a result of the nuclear deal. Iran is now saying, we want that now as a precondition for reopening the strait. We've seen a recent consolidation of the hardline position with the 6 new appointments that Mojtaba Khamenei did for military positions. We've also seen a closening of the links between the security, intelligence, and military apparatus with the appointment of Hosseini Taeb as the head of the Basij, which is responsible for internal security. Mohsen Rezai, the pick as the head of the Supreme National Security Council. It's not like Zol Gad, his predecessor, was a sissy. So, it's like 6 of one, half dozen of another, more or less.
Okay, but, so I'll be just on that point. So be sure to, if I ever have a question of who is the sissies and who is the hardliners, is that the
there are no sissies left in the Iranian ruling polity.
So now you mentioned the midterm. So if just correct me if I'm wrong, but are you seriously saying that this could go all the way up until November?
Oh my God, yeah, of course. Yeah, I think it's more likely that happens. I mean, in terms of, it depends what the definition is. There's not going to, I think it highly unlikely that there will ever be a nuclear deal that's worth its name between the U.S. and Iran. But do we think that the Strait of Hormuz will still be closed or largely constricted and that we'll be in this neither war nor peace scenario? It's quite possible, over 50%. President Trump now, his most recent comments are that, we're going to try patience. We're going to try low-keying it. Well, 2 problems with that. 1, he has no strategic patience. And 2, the situation is inherently escalatory and unstable because Iran is still trying to run the blockade. And the U.S. is still shooting at Iranian ships. Iran's trying to run the blockade. The U.S. is shooting. And the U.S. is also, Iran is preventing ships from trying to go through the strait on its own. Just today, the head of the spokesperson for the IRGC, Khatem Al-Anbiya headquarters, said that we're in control of the strait because the Iranians took real umbrage at President Trump's ridiculous assertion that, in fact, the strait is fully open and that the U.S. is in control of it.
I see. So but I don't see how this can continue. Is it just simply that the Iranians will do the bare minimum to keep it going, so to speak? They'll pin the US down in certain ways to keep them from escaping, so to speak. Like, how do they keep them in
Strait closed, again, we know that Iran has the necessary military might to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, right? Or mostly closed. 10 to 20 ships a day sneaking through the Omani coastal waters with their transponders off to do shuttle runs doesn't really cut it. And there's no ships really, or not many, heading into the strait. So that can continue. The U.S. naval blockade can continue. So, I mean, the Iranian government is on a war footing. They're preparing themselves for a long-term military engagement. These guys, I mean, who's in charge in Iran? Old military men, right? And this is, generals always fight the last war. This is what they're used to. This is what they're planning for. So how can it go on? Inertia. I mean, what's going to change it? The only two things that are going to change it are one side feeling so much pain that it capitulates on its red lines, right? I think it's more likely the U.S. will do that because, as commodities traders are saying, even though the price of oil is still only, 83, 87, the crack spreads, the 1, 2, 3 diesel crack spreads, the 1, 2, 3 spreads, the refined products are getting less and less available because it's not just the Strait, it's the Bab el-Mandab, it's, the Black Sea, there's a refining shortage. So the products that one refines from oil are getting less available and more expensive. And because this administration is so good at jawboning the market, and because we've drawn down our strategic petroleum reserves to where we've got only, I think, 48 million barrels left till we hit what legislatively is tank bottoms, although there's still some below that. The system is losing resilience.
App is the stream is being a bit glitchy today. Yeah, I mean, look, so what's happened to this Omani-Iranian dynamic here? Because it's sort of, they said it at the beginning of the week, over the weekend, that the deal was imminent. To be honest, the Iranians sounded a bit like Trump at one point, them saying that it's finalized, we're about to see it, but still kind of waiting for it. Where is it?
It's done. It doesn't have they don't want to start it. That's the whole point. No, but again, Iran does not want to reopen the strait. What Iran and Oman were negotiating over was a 60-day temporary solution for navigating maritime traffic through the strait. It was, by all accounts, a situation where Iran controlled incoming through its own coastal waters and also coordinated with with Oman to control outgoing, right? It's all about the traffic separation scheme. And it looked like they were there. They pretty much had an agreement. But the whole point is Iran's not going to implement that agreement now, and it would have been a temporary agreement while they continued considered longer term arrangements. Iran is not going to implement that agreement now because if maritime traffic through the strait increases, the economic pressure on the U.S. administration drops, and they don't want it to drop. They want it to maintain or increase. You ever see on TV, they have this weird thing in the U.S. now, right? Called slap fights, where two guys stand in the center of this ring, big guys, and one slaps the other in the face as hard as he can, and then the other guy does the same. This is actually a thing now in America, which is a whole nother discussion for another time. That's sort of what's happening between the U.S. and Iran.
I mean, everyone, if you're joining, we are talking to Iranian expert Eyre, but also apparently WrestleMania and I suppose a sort of a version of American Japanese sumo wrestling, by the sounds of it. So you never know what you're going to find on the Global Gambit. So okay, but I mean, I'm just a little bit confused though, because I try to cover this as much as possible, but I obviously focus on Ukraine as well. There's been some reports in China and Taiwan in the past week, which I've been looking at as well. Right now we have the Yemen Houthis dealing shots, shall we call it, Saudi Arabia on an intermittent basis. Israel's heightening pressure on Lebanon, which is obviously a deal breaker for Iran. And then we have the Strait of Hormuz. So we seem to have these three separate theatres right now, overall, that sort of are somewhat disjointed. They are interlinked because of the actors being indirectly associated, but they're not the same field, if that makes sense, kinetic field. So are we seeing a heightened escalation? I'll put it this way, right? We had Ross Harrison on. We've had a couple of other colleagues, Jason Campbell on, and we were talking about vertical versus horizontal escalation. So are we in an escalatory phase, or is it more just of a status quo and the Iranians turn up the notch when they want to, occasionally, just to keep the US on that sort of back end?
I want to say it's escalatory because I wouldn't want to. It's a mistake to think that Iran is controlling all three dials. That it can turn up Houthis, that it can turn up Hezbollah, or the Israel, what's going on there. But I mean, to me, the more accurate way to describe it is you had a complex system that had homeostasis, that had balance, right? And then you can trace the causal chain all the way back, but one of the key events was the October 7th attack, and then the two U.S. attacks, especially the February 28th, whatever it's called, Operation Epic Fury, whatever we call it. That system's broken, okay? And so everything is in flux. The Houthis didn't attack Saudi just because Iran picked up the phone and said, hey, attack Saudi. They saw an opening. They were unsatisfied with the status quo of the ceasefire they had with Saudi. They saw a chance for tactical gains. That, along with the Iranian desire, so they did the whole Bab el-Mandab, closed to Saudi traffic, attacks. Israel, Netanyahu has never met a ceasefire that he doesn't feel like repeatedly violating. So, Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon, he's running for election himself. If he doesn't get reelected, there's a decent chance he goes to jail. And the Israeli people don't want peace. They like this war. They like IDF aggression against Iran, in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. So his goals strategically have bifurcated significantly from President Trump's strategic goals. President Trump's strategic goal right now is get out of this. Just pop smoke and declare victory and get the least bad option. Much like his business strategy before, when things went bad, you declare bankruptcy. He wants to declare strategic bankruptcy in the Iran war. He can't do that because if he just walks away and declares victory, saying, as he's saying now, the Strait of Hormuz is open, we control it, which is nonsense. The strait's still closed. Reality bats last. So he's got to get to strait open. The problem is Iran realizes that and is saying, no, we're not going to let you off the hook because, I have to do this. It's actually, it's because,
no, you remind me of the guy from Jurassic Park. No. Oh, that's so annoying. Sorry, go on.
But anyway, that's where we are. Iran has seized a strategic initiative. It doesn't want to be the one who's always responding to U.S., initiatives. And so that's what it's doing. And so now the U.S. is on its back foot. The U.S. cannot escalate because it's concerned about Iran targeting Gulf GCC energy infrastructure. And, we've all read the stories about decreased stockpiles of effective, intercept weapons, missile intercept weapons. No, we still have a lot. But, President Trump, this administration really don't have any strategy at this point other than just hope. Hope is not a strategy. Hope and talking points.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy. You remind me of a guest that we're going to be having on at the end of the month, Sarah Payne. A lot of people really enjoy her analysis. Look, I'm going to do a comparative analysis point for a second, or to make a point, because if we use Putin's objectives in the war in Ukraine as a comparison, some people speculate that the Kremlin's goal at this point is to try and seize Luhansk and Donetsk, the two primary oblasts in eastern Ukraine, and sort of you have to overcome what's known as the fortress belt or fortress cities. And the reason that's such a primary goal is because Putin would then able to frame it to the population. Hey, look, we've achieved our strategic goals here. We're going to start drawing down. You know, he wants to try and find an off-ramp. So what could be the equivalent for Trump if because they can't say that they control the Strait of Hormuz. They can't say they've adequately destroyed the uranium or the Navy or the military. What is the most optimal choice Trump has for saying, oh, we've achieved what we wanted, let's go home, guys? Well, the Iranians aren't let him out anyway, in any sense.
This administration, at least in the second term, for however long it's in power, has been consistently saying 1 + 1 = 3. Okay, so when you tell me they can't claim that we control the strait, they're doing it now.
Right.
This is not a high school forensic contest where the U.S. administration makes a claim and a judge holds up a card saying, no, 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 just like in Jurassic Park, right? He can say whatever he wants. He does say whatever he wants. You know, he's like, remember that Baghdad Bob, the Iraq War information minister? You know, we have driven out the Allies. You know, Schwarzkopf is dead. We have won. The Allies have. He can say whatever he wants, and he's doing it. Okay. Now, the difference is the markets only take so much of that. You can only jawbone physical reality so much. But realistically, what's the best President Trump can do right now? Declare victory. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. We have opened the Strait of Hormuz. We've destroyed their Navy, which is true, but so what? Their Navy wasn't a threat. We've destroyed their Air Force, which is true, but so what? The Air Force was never a threat, right? You know, we haven't destroyed their drones and missiles, which are the threat. So this is the problem. And he just has to take a deal where the Strait of Hormuz is open under Iranian control with some degree of the, I like that, some degree of the.
I'm not trying to desensitize the seriousness.
Oh my God. Okay, that was good.
You didn't say the magic. No, that's literally Iran, though. That's literally the meme. This is Iran. You didn't say the magic word. Okay. You didn't do the magic thing. You didn't.
That's what he can do. Declare victory and just get the strait open as much as possible, as quickly as possible, under Iranian control. But even that's going to be hard because the Iranians don't want to give him that now. So he literally has no options except hoping that the naval blockade causes Iran to bend the knee, which I think is highly unlikely.
Now, I've seen someone mention that's my doorbell. Ignore that. I've heard someone mention Syria in the comments, and I did kind of want what your take on what you think Iran might be thinking about the Bashar al-Assad death sentence in the landmark trial. Which obviously, I mean, there's not much they can do extraditing him from Moscow. But what do you think Iran makes of that? Because if Syria was a core part of the Shia Crescent and their proxy network, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Syria was the only strategic ally in the Arab world that Iran had since 1979. In the Iran-Iraq War, Syria is the only country to align itself with Iran. But look, Iran's got bigger fish to fry than Bashar al-Assad. You know, he's in Moscow. It's not enforceable. So, you know, Iran has a fealty to its, its proxy allies. I doubt if that extends to Bashar al-Assad. And in any case, they can't do anything about it. So I'm sure they all have opinions. But yeah, it's not a front burner issue for Iran at this point.
No, that's a good segue, I think, because the other thing that I've been really captured by it, maybe it's a bit over the top, but I think was really interesting is the Mecca agreement, this defense pact between the three. Now, I'm sure you're going to say, okay, slow down, Sonny Jim, but I think it's fascinating. I did a video on it a couple of days back, and most of my audience is interested in Europe or Ukraine, Russia. But this one it's got like 100,000 views almost. So people are pretty interested in that. Now, the key caveat is that, I wrote an even bigger Substack about it. Everyone needs to go and read it. Including you, Alan. Yeah, exactly. Right. You'll love that. No, there's my shameless plug. But no, but I think the key distinction is that the caveat is that it says every attack should be considered an attack on oil, not is an attack on oil. So is a disclaimer like that demonstrative of the fact that not much is going to make of this? I mean, the Houthis attacked Saudi Arabia a day after it was signed and nothing happened. So, or is there more potential from it, do you think?
No, I'm not poo-pooing it. It's a big deal. I mean, again, my thesis is we've broken a complex system. Part of that is the security network. None of these countries, the Gulf countries, are going to forsake the U.S., but they're going to be hedging. This is Saudi Arabia hedging. They've already got a strong alliance with Pakistan. They've now extended it to Turkey, and there's talk of it extending it to Egypt. So again, they're looking to supplement their security arrangements. But you're quite right in that this doesn't mean that Pakistan or Turkey, or when Egypt joins, Egypt is going to rush to Saudi's offense, if Iran launches a Scud, right? But it increases the security ties among the countries, and that is significant. Again, there are alternative new arrangements, because one of the keys about breaking a complex system is you can't put it back together again. The old security arrangement in the Gulf, gone. Okay? 130 ships a day through the Strait of Hormuz, gone. Whatever the new normal is different than what President Trump blew up with Israel on February 28th.
But I mean, Egypt's not part of it yet. They could join it, and I think there's a large belief that they could. But what I think is interesting about this is what it does do for dependency on the United States as the security guarantor, right? The United States has been seen as the overarching baseline. If shit really hit the fan, that the United States would be the one to come in and ensure that it was resolved. All we've seen now from the past 6 months of war is that reality come to life, and the Gulf states have realized, well, shit, they proved to be absolutely useless. Maybe under a different head of state and president, it would have been different. But, well, we probably wouldn't be in this situation. But, like, how much likelihood can such countries actively galvanize in the face of a future sort of issue with Iran? I personally am skeptical about how much the Saudis want to deal with Iran, because they know Iran's a lot more potent as a military force than they are. But Turkey's a pretty potent military force. Like, I don't think enough people consider the potential Turkey has. We saw how easily they dealt with Syria in 2019 in that incursion or whatever. So what could this mean for the balance of power? Or you think it's too early to tell?
First of all, I would dispute the contention that Iran is a potent military force. They're not.
Well, relative to Saudi Arabia, surely.
Yeah, true. Well, yeah, but that's true too. But here's the key thing about the security arrangement of the Gulf. The spinal cord of any security arrangement is what we call in the military your TONE, your Table of Organization Equipment, which is a fancy way of saying your weapons. Where are you getting your weapons from? Because these are, where you're getting your planes from, your tanks from, whatever, your air defense from. Because these systems require a lot of maintenance, a lot of upkeep. And so the U.S. has been selling, billions and billions of hardware into the GCC countries for a long time, to counter the putative Iranian threat. That's still there. None of these companies are looking through the Sears catalog, and that's a dated reference, saying, I want to buy Chinese military equipment now, or I think I'll swap out my U.S. military equipment for Pakistan military equipment, right? So, yeah, Saudi is supplementing its security arrangement with the U.S., with these other alliances. And they might grow over time, because one of the things that this war has shown is that the American security umbrella helps in a drizzle, but if it starts raining, you're going to get wet. And all these countries are soaked at this point, okay, to include Jordan. So no one is giving up and saying, hey, take your weapons back, take your, F-35s back or whatever. But they're saying, we need to hedge. And yeah, these are the first steps. Wars, as who is that guy? Norman Rickliffs, historian. He says, war is the kingdom of unintended consequences, or the land of unintended consequences. And we're seeing the first order effects now, and we're just starting to see the second and third order effects in terms of what's changing in the region. But this will play out over years.
Interesting. Okay. So, no, I mean, I think ever since BTS and the ousting of Assad, people have looked at Turkey's interests as the sort of vying for regional hegemony, and certainly the Israeli-Turkish dynamic has been garnering a lot of attention for potential military engagement. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. One of the very most interesting, not most, but one of the very interesting things that's happened recently is, you know, Israel turning up the rhetoric against Turkey, right? So that's fascinating. Yeah, it's a dynamic situation. It's the Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. These are interesting times.
It certainly sounds like that it's interesting times. You're very British, Alan, and a diplomat.
My mother was British.
Oh, right, okay, fair. But okay, so one of the other things that I think is fascinating, and some people have mentioned it here, is that how is Trump going to force Israel to stop engaging in Lebanon and, of course, Gaza, so that the IRGC demands are open, are meant so that Hormuz opens? How is Trump going to put pressure on Israel? Because he doesn't seem like he's doing anything like that.
I don't think he's going to. I think, again, I mean, we're seeing what Israel's doing in southern Lebanon. You know, this whole tripartite agreement with Lebanon, the U.S. and Israel is already deader than vaudeville. You know, all these agreements never get to phase 2. So, yeah, I don't think he is. Again, the U.S. has the power to stop Israel, but it requires consistent messaging and pressure over time. And the one thing this U.S. administration, or one of the many things this U.S. administration is incapable of doing, is strategic constancy, right? It's just, you know, what I referred to earlier as strategic attention deficit disorder. So it's like, you know, it's like a crow seeing shiny things and picking them up and then dropping it and picking up the next shiny thing. So for President Trump's administration right now, they don't want Israel to attack Iran, okay? They don't want Israel to blow up what's happening in southern Lebanon, though we're on the verge of that. We've seen that for domestic political reasons, you know, Bibi Netanyahu had to renounce the Gaza peace plan, you know, or at least the ongoing implementation of it. Because, again, with every single peace plan, the sequencing is the issue. Much like with Iran, you know, who goes first? You know? So, you know, Hezbollah says Israel withdraws and we do X. Israel says Hezbollah has to disarm before we withdraw. You know, so it's a goat rope.
What's a goat rope?
Goat rope. Wow. A goat rope is a U.S. military term for just like a dog's breakfast, I guess you say, just a totally messed up situation. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me think of Yes Minister, where there's a scene where the Sir Humphrey is talking to the Minister of Administrative Affairs, I think it is, and the minister who's newly elected is discussing, trying to understand why the British government entered into the European Economic Community at the time, or EEC, in the 80s. Thatcher used to say that it was what she based foreign policy on, at least. But she and he's explaining that the reason why the Brits went into Europe was to make a whole pig's breakfast of it, set the Germans off against the French, the Dutch off against the Italians, the Dutch off against the French, off against the Germans. The only way you make it beneficial for British national interests is by ensuring that it doesn't benefit anyone else's foreign interests.
It's just the military has a lot of good acronyms for a mess, some of which I cannot pronounce on the internet. But yeah, goat rope, leap X, just a mess.
Okay, interesting. So just a little bit more, I think a good place to sort of wrap maybe the last couple of questions, Alan, is Trump demanding compensation from Iran for those he claimed Iran has killed. So now not only has Trump moved away from saying everything's fine to now, well, we demand some kind of compensation for the damage and loss of lives you have caused.
Yeah, but again, without putting too fine a point on it, you should not pay attention to what he says. Because
moving on.
I mean, he said that because the previous head of the Supreme National Security Council, Zulgad, put out a 6-point resolution with maximalist demands in terms of asking for U.S. reparations. And so President Trump, in essence, said, oh, yeah, well, we want money for blah, 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 right? Is that U.S. policy now? You know, it's like Schrodinger's cat. There is no U.S. policy. U.S. policy is unformed until someone moves to implement it. President Trump says stuff without sustained, rational, strategic thought behind it quite often. Okay? So if you take that as your North Star for trying to divinate what U.S. policy is, you will get lost very quickly.
Well, I just thought you paused and finished your sentence as Trump just says stuff, which I think kind of summarizes it adequately as well. He just says stuff.
Well, he says what he wants you to believe to be true. In that, he is not unique. It's just that the ontological difference between what he claims and underlying reality with President Trump is far greater than with most world leaders.
Well, I'm just writing it down because I'm going to put it on a T-shirt and coffee mugs, and then we can, yeah, you know, we can put it on Etsy or whatever, Alan. But one of the things that I think is also quite interesting is these 6 conditions, because I've been slightly confused when people are saying that they're trying to negotiate an interim peace agreement. Does that mean that the one from July is dead? Or
dead. Just, you know, I think Iran said suspended. Trump has said dead. And I think the Iranians treat that as a document, or at least as encapsulating goals to which they'll refer to. But certainly it's not being observed. Could it be resuscitated? Theoretically. But, I mean, the thing that's most important about that MOU is sort of it contains all the various bits of any agreement. Money for Iran, passage through the strait, way off in the back, nuclear issue, regional peace. You know, so it contains the elements of an optimal agreement and a minimal agreement. It's just how it's configured in the sequencing is subject to change. But it's a useful document just to sort of get a perceptual grip of what each side is seeking.
Then what all this fanfare around that original MOU being signed in the run-up to July. So what? It's just all that diplomatic effort has just been completely wasted over weeks. They're not going to try and
Here's a corollary to President Trump just says stuff, or he likes to sign stuff, you know? So he liked the idea of a media event in Versailles where he signs a peace agreement and holds it up. He loves signing things and talking to press. Sometimes that which he signs is fully implemented. Quite often, it is never implemented. That MOU kicked so many cans down the road, right? So it forestalled and delayed the serious negotiations that were essential to begin to find a negotiated solution. Okay. Now, sometimes if there's a minimal degree of goodwill, that works. My ex-colleague Richard Nephew wrote a very good essay recently on comparing and contrasting the MOU with the JPOA, the Joint Plan of Action, which was the interim document we signed with Iran, a year or so before the JCPOA. It was a provisional interim agreement that set up the structure of what we would negotiate, gave Iran some benefits. And so that MOU, had there been effective communication and a minimal amount of trust between the two sides, could have served as a good first step. But because there was no underlying political alignment between the U.S. and Iran, and basically all it was, kicking everything down the road, it was doomed to fail. Not doomed to fail, but it was probabilistic that it would fail. which it did quickly.
But maybe I'm just being a bit slightly dense in. If you spent weeks developing an MOU with specific frameworks, expectations, pathways towards more comprehensive negotiation on specific elements down the road, why would you then go back to the complete start? Isn't that a waste of time for both sides?
Well, again, this U.S. administration is not good and does not like doing diplomacy and negotiations. It outsources it to other countries. Again, back in the Obama administration, the U.S. administration, and this is unclassified now, was meeting secretly with the Iranians in Oman on the framework of an agreement that was inserted into the P5+1 negotiating process and became the JPOA. This took period over a long time. People like Bill Burns, experienced negotiators were involved. Contrast that to the MOU, which was being done by largely third countries. The people in charge of it in the U.S. administration, were financiers, real estate developer, no real expertise, as far as I can tell, at the highest levels in terms of expertise in international negotiations. And expertise is domain specific. You can be a really good real estate developer. That doesn't mean you're really good at negotiating international agreements with a hostile country. So, yes, effort went into the MOU. Serious effort, much of it by Pakistan as an intermediary, some by Qatar, some by other countries, and much by the U.S. I'm not saying that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were lounging by the beach, drinking Mai Tais. They were working hard too, right? They were, working hard too, but not hard enough and not long enough. That's the key point. And not smart enough. Not long.
Yes, but I appreciate all that, but it doesn't alleviate my confusion or concerns about the fact that we're literally just going to start trying to we're going to redo an entire MOU. You're going to delete all the from a project.
You go back to the basic principles of that MOU still exist. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You just have to fix that wheel. The problem is that whatever you go back to the negotiating table with Iran, all the issues that led you to flee the negotiating table or hide under it when the bombs were dropping are still there. Okay? Why did the MOU break down? Because Article 5, which said to the Iranian mind that in the interim phase, Iran controls passage through the strait, was blown up by the U.S. in Iran's eyes when the U.S. tried to get ships through the Omani coastal waters. Okay? Yeah. So that ambiguity, given everything we've talked about, blew up the MOU.
Okay, now, so the MOU was largely, sort of sabotaged, but it's not completely useless or redundant as a baseline for renewed. Right. Okay, because what I'm trying to get at here is simply that the Iranians are talking about different, what are they? These 6 conditions: not threatening Iran or insulting the nation.
What's gone? 3 conditions. Those 6 conditions were Zulqadr. The last day he was the head of the Supreme National Security Council, he issued those 6 conditions. He went away. He's now doing something else. And Mohsen Rezai issued 3 conditions. They're essentially the same. The U.S. lifts the blockade, gives us money. There's one other, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Ending all rules against removal of your forces and stuff
and
like that.
Ceasefire. I mean, actually, the one Zulqadr did was more extensive because it included, Gaza, Iraq, and Yemen, I think. So, or at least Iraq and Yemen. But it's essentially the same. The Iranians are now, and this is in contrast to the MOU. What's the difference between the MOU and now? The difference is now twofold. The Iranians don't want to open the strait while a longer-term deal is being hashed out, and they want to move the benefits of unblocked assets to now. Because they know that the U.S. is never going to lift sanctions against Iran, and that the U.S. is never going to facilitate some $300 billion reconstruction and development fund. They're going to use what Iran is doing now is saying, it's not like the U.S. is going to give money to Iran. Best case, they unblock a serious part of our assets, right? Frozen assets. Where they want to get money from is from the GCC countries as a form of protection, in terms of tolls or service charges, and also just straight deals between, the various GCC countries and Iran.
Yeah, no, it seems to me, I think maybe some allowance of assets to be unfrozen by third-party nations.
Yeah.
And discussion over sort of US engagement with certain nations, but I don't think much more than that. And so the Iranians are going to be leveraging their control of the Strait of Hormuz to be getting some form of financial compensation. I think that seems, again, it's very far off. I don't think this is going to happen, but that's what I seem as the most movable metrics, at least right now. But Alan, last point to simply put to you is what in the next, until we next speak in then a couple of weeks or something like that, is what to watch out for? Anything we should pay attention to? Something we've missed in all of this that you think we should be considering?
I'm sure there's lots we missed. Again, my contention is it's impossible to predict what's going to happen in complex systems. So, I could be totally wrong. The Iranian leadership could surrender tomorrow, and we're there 5 days, 5 days from now having fun. I think that unlikely. So what I would watch is economic indices in the West, the price of diesel, the level of the strategic petroleum reserve, the price of jet fuel, shortages, because that to me is the more quickly moving of the two clocks, which is the ongoing effects of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So I would watch that, and I would also, watch the periphery, because as we've talked about, this is an unstable situation. The inherent dynamic is escalatory. I think that it's unlikely that the U.S. will decide to take the initiative and escalate significantly, because it realizes if it does that, Iran is going to cause a lot of economic pain to the GCC countries and their energy infrastructure, their desalination plants upon which they're reliant. But, the fallacy in war is that people are in control of events. That's the main takeaway, which is that war, has its own internal dynamic, and it's to a large extent beyond human control. So what President Trump wants, what Mojtaba Khamenei and his people want is one thing, but the internal dynamics of the situation are not fully under either side's control.
So America isn't great again yet.
Yeah, let's take a step back. It's,
sorry, someone asked that in the question, so I thought I'd get that into the conversation.
You're witnessing, the decline of a superpower. It's not, possibly it's reversible. Certainly not under this administration, because this administration's signature characteristic is sort of indifference and incompetence to what previous administrations thought about, long-term U.S. national security. So it's a troubling dynamic, but here we are.
Certainly. Well, everyone, here we are with Alan Eyre of the MEI, or Middle East Institute. For those interested, I have just put a link to the conversation I had with your colleague Jason Campbell on exactly what you said about.
Harrison is great. Yeah, they got a lot of good people.
Really good chat about US terminal decline, seemingly under what's happening. Trump went into this expecting regime change in Iran. What he got was the perpetual change in the United States influence of the region. But everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, then check out Alan's work and writings over at MEI. And of course, subscribe for more conversations like this. And well, stay safe out there. There's a lot happening. Thanks a lot, Alan. Really awesome stuff, and always a pleasure. If there's anything you want me to do, I don't know. You should be on Substack. I think you'd have a lot of interest and feedback.
I do have a Substack account. I just don't post to it often. I do. I do. It's called Alan Eyre is Trying to Think.
Okay. Well,
I'll start.
Try to do more on Substack. No, I'm being facetious, because there's a lot of, if I may be bold to say, a lot of academics I'm noting are, branching out into other forms of revenue, and you have such a good sense of humor. You've got great energy on camera, and I think you'd be really popular on Substack for like writing things in the style that I've read your stuff. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunity there for people like yourself, especially given your unique background being on the JCPOA front. I think that'd be really fascinating. But that's not trying to, you know,
there's a good word in German, Sitzfleisch. Do you know what that is? It's like meat in a chair. You know, in order to write, you have to plant your ass in a chair and write. And that's something that I'd much rather, you know, lay on the couch and read. So yeah, I have a Substack account. I should write more. I'm going to try to like crank something out like once a week as a start. So
that's
thanks.
what you need. That's the optimal amount. And the other reason I say is because I started, I don't know if you're familiar with Trita Parsi.
Oh, yeah, I've been here for 20 years.
Yeah, so Trita's very active on there now, and you know, he's pulling in a lot of engagement. It brings it a lot of attention to his work elsewhere. You know, for all I like about Trita, the one thing I have respect for him especially is he's very good at playing the game of like knowing where to be on and stuff.
He's ubiquitous. I see him all over the place. Yeah.
Well, you'll see him on here in about 10 minutes. So
oh, yeah, I knew him back from 2002, I think. He's a very shy guy. Yeah. And very well spoken.
Yeah, no, but we should have you both on at some point. I think it'd be an interesting debate. But all right, Alan, I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I don't like debating people. I like just a conversation. But yeah. Anyway, you take care.